When you go to journalism school, as most journalists do, um, a key thing that is taught is who do you trust as a source? Now, what we call a source is basically it's layman's terms for the person we interview. If I'm a reporter and I talk to you and I want to find out some particular information about the story that I'm trying to write, you are, and I'm asking you to provide that information, you are the source of that information. We always say trust our sources. We don't reveal our sources. If we're competing for a story or someone provides us some information anonymously and people ask who does it, well, we trust our sources and we don't reveal them. Or if a source goes on the record, if I'm asking you a question and you say, I am John Smith from the energy company telling you about energy rates, here's information about that, and I write my story and say John Smith from the energy company has told me about the rates. You are a source on the record. This is all terminology just to say like who are the people that we've interviewed and who are the people that we've talked to. But in recent years, and especially in recent times as of 2020, we've begun to question as an industry how reliable are some of our sources, particularly when it comes to law enforcement police. So, as we've seen in 2020, but not just in 2020, in years at this point, getting accurate, reliable information from police officers and police agencies and law enforcement, especially when it comes to Black Death, especially when it comes to Black deaths that seem very suspicious. Getting that accurate information seems to be a challenge sometimes. There could be a video where we see, for complete example here, we see an officer, just completely railing on someone, beating them upside the head and all these types of things. But the way we're taught as journalists is we have to get the police officer's side of the story. So we may say in a report that we write, this officer was doing this, but we also have to say, well, why did the officer do this? We have to go back to that law enforcement agency and ask why. And that officer may come up with something like, oh, this person was resisting arrest, they were doing this, they were doing that. And the rules, the ethics that we abide by as journalists is we have to print that. We have to print that. You may have seen in recent years where journalists have been criticized for that practice, because now we have the videos that people are seeing, a lot more body cam footage, a lot more dash cam footage, things like that. And what the viewer or the reader may see in the camera footage doesn't always line up with what is being reported in the story, because again, we're going based off of the ethics that we learned in journalism school, or even if we didn't go to journalism school and we learned, at the hand of an editor, that this is the way we report things. We report based on what the police tells us. We know now that this practice may be flawed, and this is why we as an industry are starting to have these conversations now in terms of, do we always trust 100% what the police says, particularly when it comes to communities of color. We've seen in many cities at this point that the relationship between police officers and communities of color have been strained. But again, when we as journalists want to build trust with our communities and our readers, we sometimes may lean too much on relying on law enforcement to give us information instead of taking a long look, a wide shot at the community and seeing that maybe the community has some things to say on this matter as well. So what does that mean? Some newsrooms, not all of them, are reevaluating whether to, when do you bring the police officer or the police agency in as a source? Do you bring them in right away, or do we, or how do we approach this? This is a very hard question for our industry. We're not quite sure how to answer this, because we are operating on a model that has been practiced for decades, if not centuries at this point. The other question is, how quickly will some of these ideas spread? So Usually in media, the questions or these harder questions start at the top. They start at the larger places like your larger wire agencies or your larger newspapers, and sometimes in some of the larger schools of journalism. But it takes a while for these things to trickle down into mid-sized markets, smaller markets. So if you may be wondering why a large city like New York is talking about this, but not a smaller city like Poughkeepsie, for example, it's because it takes a while for these things to trickle down, and then you might see another incident happen that may be between a police officer and it's race related, and it may be reported one way in a larger city because they're having that conversation, but this smaller or mid-sized city is still going off of the older rules, and the reporting may not be how the reader may accept it. So this is a very hard conversation for our industry. I will say that nothing in journalism moves quickly. For example, you may have seen a lot of talk around capitalizing the B in black and capitalizing some of the other races and whatnot. That conversation has taken place before anybody watching this video was born. So, and we're just now reaching that point where we're starting to capitalize the B in black, and people are asking, should we capitalize the W in white, and so on and so forth. So, again, asking if how trustworthy do we trust the police in sensitive situations? We're not quite there yet, but the conversation is happening, and we should have some kind of resolve, excuse me, in the near future. Thank you.